Hello, sovereign lovers. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for being here today. I decided to do this live today to chat a little bit about these interesting energies. Lots of interesting stuff happening in the world right now. I was telling my husband and my friend yesterday that I feel like the Matrix is glitching. Like, things are so bizarre sometimes that it's like, what is even happening in the world right now? And it's curious and interesting and sometimes confusing. So I figured I would come on here and chat a little bit about my thoughts on this, right? How can we navigate these interesting times? Tonight we are in a dark moon phase. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the new moon in Leo. So dark moons are all about releasing, letting go, closing out cycles. We're closing out the cycle of this last moon and we're going into a new one tomorrow. In the Mexica calendar, we are in a day 11 Tecpatl, 11 Flint, which is, the Flint is all about cutting, right? Cutting off the old, letting go, chopping that which doesn't serve us. And 11 is the closing of a cycle and the beginning of a new one, right? The 10 closes out this one cycle and the 11 is the beginning of new. So there's a lot of energy of releasing, of letting go in order to create new stuff. And that's like my jam. I love this type of energy. I love anything that has to do with death and rebirth. So I feel like these energies that are present right now are all about what are we going to do with this old way and how can we make space for a new way of being, a new way of existing. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of chat about, there's this whole TikTok debacle going on about an influencer who made an anti-inflammatory drink or shared an anti-inflammatory recipe, and people are saying that it's Mexican agua fresca. And I'm Mexican, I know agua fresca, and I also happen to follow this TikToker because she shares a lot of great information about anti-inflammatory issues, hormonal imbalances, and things like that. Anti-inflammatory recipes, I mean. So when I actually have made the recipe, have made the drink, and it never even crossed my mind that it would be considered agua fresca, but there was a whole issue around it, and her account got banned on TikTok, and people were leaving nasty comments to her on Instagram as well. And I understand both sides of the situation. As a first generation Mexican American, I understand the ancestral trauma of colonization. I understand that because I've been on a journey to reconnect with my indigenous culture over the years. I've had to reconnect because the connection was lost as a result of colonization, as a result of migration, as a result of poverty, where my parents had to travel to this country in order to survive, in order to help their families survive. And as a result, I lost the connection with the ancestral wisdom that would have been available to me. And so I understand the feeling of loss, the grief, and then seeing somebody else share a recipe, or other people that are influencers, a lot of people with a huge following, sorry about the traffic, share recipes that seem like our recipes, and getting credit for it, getting likes, getting I imagine she's a paid content creator. So there's a lot of frustration and anger there, and I understand that comes from a very deep wounding and ancestral wounding. And I think we're at a crossroads here in terms of our society, where we have a choice of how we deal with these situations. And what I've noticed is over the years, we've dealt with these situations by doing the exact same things that were done to us. If this was done to us, then we should do it to them so that they know. And I think that was the way because we didn't know, right? We were colonized, and so we learned to respond the way a colonizer would. And it's taken me personally a long time to undo that. I like to look back at my Facebook memories, and I see a lot of times how I used to have that same reaction. Let's cancel this person. Let's shut this person up. Let's get them fired. Let's do all of these things because they hurt me, so I have to hurt them. We have to hurt them back. They hurt us, we hurt them back. And this is part of the colonizer mentality. We have fallen into that mentality and gone into that behavior where we become the thing that we're fighting. And it's very sad because we fight it so much that we become it. And it's sad because that's not who we were, right? That's not who we were as Indigenous people. That's not who we were as people of the land. But we learned that because it was imposed upon us. And it is still our responsibility to do the healing work. So I've done the healing. I am in the constant process of doing the healing work because it's a lifelong process, and it's very difficult and it's very painful at times. There have been times where I've rejected the colonized parts of myself. There have been times where I've struggled with identity because I was born and raised in the US, but my parents are Mexican and I grew up very Mexican. I am fluent in both English and Spanish. I have always eaten traditional Mexican foods, and there's this huge culture shock as a Mexican American, as somebody who is very tapped into the traditional the Mexican ways of the area where my family is from, not necessarily the traditional indigenous ways, more like my parents are from a very small town, and I used to spend my summers there, and I loved it. I loved being in the pueblo. I loved eating the foods. I love eating the foods here. My parents have always cooked Mexican foods. We very rarely ate American foods. And so I very much grew up in the Mexican culture, but not the indigenous culture. And that's what I've worked so hard to reconnect to. And as I have reconnected to the indigenous culture, I realized that my Mexican identity was also very colonized. The way that some of these small towns think is also a very colonized way, right? There are certain things, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame and judgment, which comes from a very Catholic way of thinking, right? The church. So as I've reconnected to my indigenous culture, as I've connected to indigenous teachers and leaders in the communities and have worked with them and studied with them, I've been able to, I've tapped into a deeper knowing and a deeper understanding. And I think that we are in a time where we can merge the two ideas, right? We can merge, this is a time of balance as we enter we are in the dawn of the sixth sun, right? We're entering a new era, a new age of enlightenment. We have the option of responding the way of the colonizer, the way that that's been imposed upon us, and that we've kind of taken in and accepted, or we can tap into the ancestral wisdom and knowledge that resides within us, because all of that information exists already within us. So that's where I feel like the matrix is glitching, where there's so much polarity. As I was looking at this whole controversy over the water, over this agua fresca, this cucumber water, this spa water as it was called, there was so much anger, and people were like, yeah, ban her account. silence her completely. And I understand the reason why, right? Because we were silenced. Our traditions have been banned. Our traditions have been silenced and have been oppressed. So obviously our initial reaction is to oppress the other person, oppress somebody who would share something that we would be oppressed for, right? And so it's almost like, if I can't be free, then nobody should be free. And the way of the ancestors, the way of the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, is the two merging together, the masculine and the feminine coming together, the masculine logic brain, the masculine protector, the masculine defender of all that is sacred, and the feminine through her intuition, through her softness, through her gentleness and compassion, both coming together and working to create a new paradigm, right? Not like, they're logic brained and they're oppressive, so we have to be logic brained and oppressive. We have to beat them at their own game. How can we bring the two together? How can we bring the best out of the masculine energy and the best out of the feminine energy and merge the two, bridge that gap? How do we re-indigenize, right? That's the difference between the decolonization movement and the re-indigenization movement. The decolonization movement, I think the intention is really to unlearn the colonized ideas. What some people have taken that as is, I need to go and colonize other people, like beat them at their own game, use their colonization tactics to undo their colonization. And that doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It creates more division, more polarity. It creates more resistance. Whereas with re-indigenization, we come back to the ancestral ways of knowing. We connect through the heart. We merge the brain and the heart space together, and we show up in a world in a way that's more embodied, more compassionate, and we connect with other people. We educate people. And that's not to say that we give away our work for free, or we give away our labor, our energy for free, but rather that we are doing the internal work to remember our sovereignty, to remember our connection to spirit, to source, to the great mystery, to however, to God, however you want to see it, that we remember that connection and show up in that divinity to every experience that we encounter. And what that means is that when we show up, we can set proper boundaries with love and compassion, right? And we say, this is who I am, and you can choose to respect me, you can learn from me, I'm happy to teach you, but you have to be willing to reciprocate as well. This is a sacred reciprocity. This is a sacred connection of knowing. And this is where discernment comes in. Right? We discern who we want to work with, who we're willing to educate, and who we want to set boundaries with. Of course, we can do this as well, right? But that's where our connection to the self, our connection to our discernment, to our inner knowing, our inner compass comes in. And that's part of the work that I think is being triggered right now. I think these situations where we're fighting against people who perhaps take a recipe, and you know, I personally, I don't believe that this woman stole the recipe and said, I found a recipe for agua fresca and I'm going to go market it as something else. I think based on, I've been following her for quite some time now, based on the things that she shares and her journey through healing her body, I understand that journey. I have been on that journey for such a long time because I also have dealt with hormonal imbalances and had to deal with inflammation and finding ways to heal my body naturally. So I understand that process, and I understand wanting to find all the ways, all of the recipes, and wanting to share that with people. How can we heal ourselves naturally? So I understand where she's coming from. I don't see her. My discernment tells me that she's not somebody who said, let me steal a recipe and make it my own. But if that were the case, and we connect to her and we say to her, hey, like, my reaction would have been, if I had made the connection and thought, wow, this really seems like an agua fresca, I probably would have responded, oh, that's so cool. In my culture, that we call this agua fresca, but I didn't realize all of the anti-inflammatory properties that it had. You know what I mean? Because these are things that people in so many different cultures consume, right? And so how do we bridge a connection to people instead of adding to that separation. And I think the more that we see this polarity, the more that we're in a place where the old paradigm is about to break. And I think that's where that polarity is coming from. The old paradigm cannot exist in this new world, and so it fights. It comes to the surface. It's in your face. It's harsh. It's really, really harsh. Some of the comments that I've seen, people arguing, and they're very harsh, and they do want other people to suffer, because they've suffered. And because they've suffered and haven't worked through healing their own suffering, they want to impose that on other people as well. And like I said, I completely understand it, because I've dealt with so much of my own ancestral trauma. I deal with so much of my ancestral trauma, and there have been many times through my processing of pain where I've recognized my defense mechanisms wanting somebody else to suffer because I suffered too, right? And that becomes a thing, like, oh, I suffered, so they should suffer too. I went through this, so they should go through that too. Once you start doing that inner healing work, you start to want other people to also experience that healing, right? My husband and I went through such a difficult time in our relationship. We like to say that we went to hell and back together. And a lot of our relationship was very difficult and very painful. And we learned so many valuable lessons along the way. And our journey to healing our relationship has been magnificent and life-changing. And I'm so grateful that we got to experience that together. So when we opened up our practice of doing couples coaching and psychedelic integration coaching, the intention was, we went through all of that, and if we can help somebody through that, because we went through it blindly, we had amazing support as well. And the thing is, if somebody told us, if somebody was there to guide us through it, it would have been a lot easier. Luckily, we did get to a point where we had an amazing guide and mentor. And that's what we want to do, because once we had that mentorship, we knew, like, we had a path, we had a way out, we had a way to get through it. Somebody was holding our hand through that process, and we want to be able to do that for people. If we hadn't healed those parts of our relationship, we would still be in a place of wanting other people to go through it too. We would be saying, well, we went through it and we survived, so people just need to go through it. And I do think people need to go through their own path and their own suffering or their own difficulties. That's part of our experience. And I'm not saying that we're here to take that away from you, but I'm happy to build a bridge and help guide you along the way. And I think once you've done the inner healing, once you have processed your own inner pain, your own inner suffering, your own feelings of unworthiness, your own feelings of loss, your own grief through it, then you don't have the desire for other people to suffer as well. And so I think we're moving into an age now where we are willing to sit in our grief, where it's time to sit in our grief. It's time to feel it through. And I think when we have that reaction of, I want somebody else to suffer because I suffered too, because my ancestors suffered too, it's because we don't want to sit in the grief of our suffering. We don't want to sit in the grief of what our ancestors went through. So instead we want to punish so we don't have to feel it as much. But it's still there. It's still not fully processed. So I think the best way we can move forward and heal for our ancestors, the best way we can honor our ancestors is to do the inner healing work, to do that transmutation work of feeling our grief, of grieving what our ancestors didn't have the opportunity to grieve. And then we can show up in the world with this transmuted energy, with this new wisdom, with this new understanding, with this new inner standing, and have compassion for other people on the path. We can be that beacon for the rest of our communities that are suffering, that are going through the grief and the pain. And I see so many people out there suffering. They're angry and they're hurt, and like I said, it's completely understandable, but they are staying in that suffering instead of allowing it to flow through them, so that then they can connect, really truly connect to the ancestral wisdom that's underneath all of that. We're still sitting in the anger and not fully processing the grief, which then doesn't allow us to open to that inner knowing, that inner wisdom that the ancestors have put in us, right? It's in our DNA. It's in our very existence. We are carrying the energy of our ancestors. And when we don't process the grief and the anger, then we don't access that inner wisdom, right? We're still on the surface. We're still on the surface fighting the opposing team, fighting the colonizers, fighting everybody that triggers us, instead of looking at what that trigger is and tapping into that deep inner wisdom that's available to all of us. And I think that tonight, that's a dark moon, it's time to release. It's a time to really go within and ask ourselves, where have I not allowed myself to grieve? Where have I not allowed myself to feel the discomfort, the pain, the suffering? How can I allow it to flow through me and out, right? How can I release all of that energy? And then allow myself to really tap into what's underneath all of that, to the wisdom that my ancestors have poured into me, the wisdom that flows through my blood, through my DNA, through the cells in my body. How can I access that? The only way is to go through it, to go through that pain and the grief and the sorrow, right? And then when we do that, we have the discernment to show up in the world with this embodied wisdom, with this embodied knowledge, and not needing to prove ourselves to anybody, because nobody else is there to give us our sovereignty or give us our freedom. We are free because it's already part of who we are. That is in our DNA. We're free because we're human beings. We're free because we're God, source, the great mystery, having a human experience on this earth. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share. I hope it resonates. I hope it made some sense. I really felt it deep within my heart, and I hope that comes through. And if you're watching this, you're able to feel into it. And I honor you wherever you are on your path, and I'm here for you. I send love and blessings to all those that are sitting in their grief, that are sitting in their anger, that are processing, that are feeling the pain that our ancestors had to carry for so long. And I send you healing energy so that you can let it flow through you and release, and then truly embody the magnificence that exists within you. And on that note, I wish you a very happy dark moon, a happy Wednesday, a wonderful new moon cycle. And yeah, thank you for being here. Ometeo. Bye.